What's up, guys? Open Ice Hits with Scotty2 Hockey, back in action, doing a video in the old format, the way I started. I know some viewers like it this way, some viewers like it the way when I edit my video and put in clips and stuff like that. But this is just going to be a quick video, not stat build or nothing like that. Just talking about my highs and lows for this season for the Montreal Canadiens. For me as a fan of the Montreal Canadiens, I should say. And trust me, there were a lot more lows than highs, but I'm going to try and even it out when I do my list. I hope you guys are taking care of yourself. I know some people can't, some people have to work, some people have to find a way to provide for the family and find a way to get food and shelter. But if you can, stay home, stay safe, avoid big groups. This COVID stuff is crazy. It's the last thing I want to talk about. So let's talk about some hockey to help get our mind off it. Now, there's been a lot of lows this season for the Montreal Canadiens. Pretty much from the 15-game mark on, after Drouin and Byron went down, it's been all downhill. They lost 8 straight. At one point, they got back to a wildcard spot, but then they lost another 8 straight. And by the time the season got closed due to the COVID outbreak, there was no hope of the Habs getting in the playoffs. Like, realistically, they would have had to win every single game, and maybe even then they might not have even still got in. So it was crazy. But some of my highs for this season, there are a few bright spots for the Habs, for me as a fan personally. There are a few things that stood out to me this season that I enjoyed that make the future look a lot brighter for me as a Habs fan. It isn't all doom and gloom, which is what most Habs fans are making it out to be right now. And I don't blame them, because this season has been a complete disaster. You look at last year, the way this team was trending. Last year, they just barely missed the playoffs. They missed it by a point or two. They lost out to Columbus and Carolina for the wildcard spots. If they were in the West, they would have made it. They had more points than Colorado, who made the playoffs and did pretty decent in the playoffs themselves. And yeah, they would have been a playoff team, and it looked really good. Everybody had career highs last year. Everybody was overperforming. Carey Price had a solid season. Young players like Victor Mete looked like they were taking steps. Shea Weber was good. Jeff Petrie was good. All in all, last season was excellent. Coming into this season, it's been a complete 180. Pretty much besides Thomas Tatar and Nick Suzuki and a few other players, most players have underperformed this season. Certain prospects that we thought were going to make the team were going to do well didn't last in Montreal. A rookie who played last year who was really good this year that we all had high hopes for didn't work out, ended up in AHL at the end of the season, ended up in Laval at the end of the season, in the AHL. There was a lot of lows, there was a few highs. So let's start off with the highs. One big bright spot for me for this season, the one thing that stood out the most to me this season that I can hold on to, that I can talk about with positive light as a Habs fan, was Nick Suzuki. A guy who last year in the OHL took Guelph all the way to the playoffs, did phenomenal in the playoffs, had over 40 points, was the OHL playoff MVP, and his team won the title, went to the Memorial Cup. Even though Guelph didn't win the Memorial Cup, he performed very well in the Memorial Cup, had a ton of hype coming into this season, and he lived up to it. Nick Suzuki this season did really good. He had 41 points, 13 goals, 28 assists, and he was a minus 15 in 71 games played, so he would have probably hit the 50-point mark. And for a rookie coming in, playing in the top 6 in Montreal, where there's not a lot of elite players to play with, there's no real true superstar forwards to play with, those are really good numbers, especially considering the fact he was playing center, he was good in the face-off dot, and he was really reliable defensively. And what stood out the most to me about Nick Suzuki, his hockey IQ. He plays like a guy who's been in the league for 10 years. He doesn't sweat anything. He doesn't make a lot of rookie mistakes. I just really love his game. So he was a very big bright spot for me this season as a Habs fan. Another bright spot for me this season, maybe not as bright for other fans, maybe he didn't stand out as much to other fans as what he did to me, but was Yoel Armia. I really loved Yoel Armia's game this season, and it makes me excited to see him play next year, or whenever we do get to see him play again. Pray to God there's a season next year, which there should be. I would assume there will be. Hopefully they get through this COVID stuff. But Armia, he surpassed his career high in goals with only 58 games played. He had 16 goals. I believe his previous career high was 15. He had 30 points in 58 games played, 16 goals, 14 assists. He was a +2. But what I love about Armia is he does it all. He can kill penalties. He can control possession. He drives opposing teams nuts by stripping pucks. He's physical. He's big. He's everything the Habs need. If he had a little bit more offensive upside, he would be a true star in Montreal. He would stand out more. And I believe next year or a year down the road, he could find that true offensive stride, because he's getting better and better every year in Montreal. He had career highs last year, and this year, if he had to play a full 82-game season, he would absolutely smoked his career highs prior to that. He already smoked his career highs in goals. And another bright spot for me this season, I know there wasn't a lot of bright spots, was Ben Chiarot, a guy who, when he got picked up through the trade, when he first got traded to Montreal from Winnipeg, or no, he got signed, when he first got signed this offseason, some people, not all, but some people were comparing this guy to Karl Alzner. They were saying this could be a Karl Alzner type trade. He could be a defenseman that's overpaid, that holds us back, isn't a true top four, isn't good offensively. Ben Chiarot played great for the Habs. He was excellent defensively. He was physical. He was nasty. He put up 21 points. He had 9 goals, which I'm sure surpasses his career on goals because he's not a very offensive player. He was a +5, and when he did play with Shea Weber, him and Shea Weber fed off each other well. I really liked Ben Chiarot's game. Another lone bright spot, even though he only played 2 games this season, but he showed he can play in Montreal, and he did look good playing in NHL this year. He got 3 points out of a possible 4. Was Caden Premu. He played 2 starts in Montreal. He won 1 and he lost 1 in overtime. Both were really close competitive games. Both games he had very good numbers in, and I believe in his 2 games played he had like a 930 save percentage or something like that. I don't have his numbers in front of me, but I believe he did have really good save percentage, and he did get 3 points out of a possible 4. He won a game and he lost 1 in overtime, so he was definitely a bright spot for me this season. Now let's get into the lows. I'm sure you guys I already know what most of these are, but I'm going to pick my top 3 lows for this season. Number 1, by far and away, I'm wearing a shirt now. It's a bit wore out. It's an older shirt. I still keep it around because I love the guy. I'm wearing a Carey Price shirt. Is Carey Price, and I know he picked it up at the end of the season. In the last 10 games, Carey Price looked like the Carey Price of old. He looked like he was doing everything he can to try and drag this team into the playoffs, to try and get him some wins. But unfortunately for Price, it was too little, too late. He was too inconsistent in the season prior to this. At one point, like I said earlier, they lost 8 games, and then managed to get back into a wildcard spot after losing those 8 games. They won 3 or 4 games. Price looked okay. Then all of a sudden, Price fell apart. They lost another 8 games straight. Price was allowing 4 to 5 goals in every game. He was allowing weak goals. He just didn't look like the Carey Price of old. His confidence looked shook, and his inconsistency really surprised me this season, really stood out. Whatever way Carey Price goes is whatever way this team goes, and the fact that he had a truly rough season, at least wins-wise, truly shows how bad this team was this year. And Carey Price was a big part of it. Yes, the defense was terrible in front of him. There's a ton of excuses you can make for the guy, but I've been a fan of him for years, and he has let in a lot of goals this year he would normally not let in, and the consistency which he always had is just dying off. Besides the 2017-2018 season, Carey Price has been one of the most consistent goalies in the NHL, and unfortunately this season, he just wasn't that at all. Another big downside for me this season, I know he may have not looked that bad to some people, but defensively, he just killed me every game. He seemed like he was making bad turnovers. Points-wise, he was okay. Was Jeff Petrie. I love Jeff Petrie. Offensively, he's great. He is the best skating defenseman on the team. He carries the puck in. He's good on the power play. But defensively this year, and some of the plays he makes are just miserable. He was making turnover after turnover. He can never seem to get into the plus. He's always a minus every year. And as much as last year he made up for his mistakes with good offense, he did have some good offense this year, he just wasn't making up for it this year like he was last year. He just wasn't a Jeff Petrie that I expected him to be, and defensively he really let me down. He was really weak defensively in front of Carey Price. Him in front of Carey Price was a big reason of why Carey Price was as bad as he was, and of course other defensemen that got called up and didn't work out. Mike Riley ended up getting traded. The defense, besides the top 2, is a complete disaster at this point. Yes, I love Jeff Petrie offensively. He is good offensively, but he makes so many bonehead turnovers, so many stupid mistakes, making passes without even looking, throwing the puck up the middle of the ice, and causing turnovers that hurt the team just as much as he helps the team. So he was another big letdown. And the last letdown of the season, I can't believe I'm saying this, is the fact that neither the GM or the coach has got fired after this disaster of a season. A complete 360 of what it was last year. Last year they looked like a team that was a fringe playoff team that would come into this season and be a good playoff team, be a good team, making strides to being a contender in a couple of years down the road. It was a complete 180. Complete 360, excuse me. You can blame injuries, you can blame whatever you want, but the fact is the players that Marc Bergevin have in the system right now aren't good enough to compete and aren't good enough to contain in today's NHL. We have a good top 2 defenseman. We have Ben Chiarot. We have Shea Weber. But when you look at Montreal's forward core, our first line, as much as I love how hard they work and how well they click together, they would be a second line on most elite teams. The Habs have only had 270 goal scorers in the last 11 years. There are teams in the NHL right now with 4 70 goal scorers, with 100-point scorers. The Habs haven't had a 100-point scorer in as long as I can remember. And the fact that Marc Bergevin has been in Montreal, has been the GM of Montreal for 8 seasons now. I don't care how well he's done drafting in the past few years, for 8 seasons now, and they have missed 4 out of the past 5 years. At this point, they're the laughing stock of the NHL this season, besides trying to lose into a Zamboni driver. But Montreal, like, our fans are bearing the brunt of how bad this team is this year. It's a complete 360 from last year. It's terrible. People were saying Marc Bergevin should possibly even get fired last year because the team missed by a couple of points. And now this year they're completely out of it. They have no chance of making the playoffs. If anything, they got a good chance of getting a good lottery pick in the draft. That's how bad the team has been this year. And they decide to keep the GM around with the way this team is going. And his plan, I don't understand his plan. Develop the prospects until 3 or 4 years, until they're good enough to make this team a contender. When Cole Caulfield is going to be a star, or Nick Suzuki is going to be a star, hopefully KK will be a star. He was a guy who was another big letdown too that I let off the list. But his plan is to develop these guys until this team is a contender. 3 or 4 years down the road, they'll be good enough to contend. They'll have all their players, all their prospects will develop into good NHL players, and they'll be a solid team. But Carey Price, the pillar of the team, and Shea Weber will be way beyond their prime by then. Their contracts, which are huge, will be holding up the cap so that you can't re-sign these prospects that will be coming after ELCs, and by that point will probably be stars and want Jack Eichel money, want Connor McDavid money, and the Habs will not have the money to give them. And even if they do, how are they going to compete with a goalie that's past his prime and a number 1 defenseman that's probably going to be way over the hill by that point, if not retired? So I don't understand Marc Bergevin's plan, and I don't understand why the owner of the Montreal Canadiens is keeping this GM around. I don't hate Marc Bergevin. I like his drafting in the past few years, but losing 4 out of the past 5 years, we all know they weren't going to make the playoffs this year. People can say the season ending saved his job. It shouldn't have saved his job. It was clear the Habs weren't going to make the playoffs this year. They were a complete disaster. All this so-called scoring depth that he picked up in case of injury did nothing. The Habs had a pile of injuries, and they went completely downhill, and the owner decided to still keep the GM. So that, for me, is a big letdown. If they fired a coach as an scapegoat to keep the GM around, it disgusts me even more. It will completely turn my stomach. So those are my biggest highs and my biggest lows for this season. I know some people may disagree with me on the Marc Bergevin part. I know a lot of fans have stood by him. I have stood by him for a long time, but at this point, this team is trending in the wrong direction, and his plan just doesn't seem to work. Either go full rebuild or trade the prospects and go all in on stars that you can get now. Trade, bring some stars over, and go all in now. One or the other. This middle ground stuff hasn't worked since Marc Bergevin has been there. Hasn't worked for the Habs in the past 20 years. They need an elite superstar forward. They need a lot of things. This team needs a lot of things. They need a better defense core, and they need a better plan in general. Either trade the prospects, bring in some stars, go all in, put a team together now that can go all in and contend, or trade Carey Price, trade Shea Weber, go for the long run, rebuild over time, and slowly rebuild this team into a contender 5 or 6 years down the road. Make up your mind, and I don't think Marc Bergevin should be the guy to do it. That's just me personally. So anyways, guys, let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed the video. Stay safe if you can. Stay inside. Avoid big crowds. And, of course, take care of yourself. Open Ice Hits with Scotty 2 Hockey. Have a great day, folks. Over and out.